Okay, great. So it's lovely to be here today. My name is Maya Rigby. I'm the Governance and Safeguarding Manager at WCVA. So I work, so WCVA is the national membership body for voluntary organisations in Wales. So I work very, very closely in partnership with all our colleagues in the County Voluntary Council network across Wales, supporting local organisations with good governance and all aspects of organisational development. So we work together under the Third Sector Support Wales, the TSSW banner, which I'm sure you've heard people mentioning. So really pleased to be here today. I'm sorry I can't be with you in person because I do love coming out to West Wales to see you all, but hopefully in the next few months at some point we will be able to be together again, although it is also very nice to be able to connect virtually, and we're going to be talking a bit more about that and some of the advantages and benefits of using virtual platforms to hold meetings and AGMs today. So first, just a little disclaimer that I need to give you. The contents of this presentation is for information and educational purposes only. You need to interpret it in conjunction with your own organisation's governing document and also whatever the current coronavirus restrictions might be, and those are obviously a changing picture. And just be aware, this presentation is not legal or professional advice because that needs to be taken from a qualified provider specifically for your organisation. But hopefully it will give you some good high-level information and guidance and things to think about when it comes to moving your AGMs online. If you do by any chance, as a result of this presentation, think you need legal advice, then you should speak to an appropriately qualified provider and speak to your CVCs who will be able to talk to you about that and possibly signpost you to someone if they think that is necessary. Okay, so just to let you know that. Okay, so governance and COVID-19. It really has had a huge impact on the way that we do governance across the board, hasn't it? I mean, I'm sure most of you who will have been holding trustee meetings will have been meeting mostly virtually for almost a year now. And that has been a big shift for us, and it's brought up a lot of things that we need to think about in relation to how we run our services, how we manage staff, how we communicate with each other, how we do trustee recruitment, and of course, how we hold things like AGMs and general meetings. So it really has been just an enormous change for everyone. When it comes to meetings, we've moved from something that maybe looks something like this, a group of people around a boardroom table, to something that looks a lot more like this, which is a group of people on a Zoom meeting or a Teams meeting. This is a picture from one of our own recent trustee meetings at WCVA, which our CEO shared on Twitter a little while ago. But they seem to be enjoying themselves, so that's good. So when it comes to holding your meetings and your AGMs, as I'm sure you're all aware, any meetings have to comply with whatever the current coronavirus restrictions are. And I think looking at the way things are going, this probably means that we are going to be continuing to be running certainly things like AGMs, mostly virtually, maybe hybrid. I'll get into what these terms mean as we go. But this is for some time to come and possibly long term, because I think the way things are going, people now are having more expectations that things will be available online. So it may be that we in the future will move towards a predominantly online approach to meetings and AGMs and events, and also or possibly a mixed approach where we will have some people physically present but some people online. So I think it is something to be thinking about for your long-term planning as well, rather than just a short-term temporary arrangement, because I think the situation has changed things and has changed our members' expectations around how we will engage with them. So just a couple of definitions, just so we're clear on what we're talking about. I'm mostly going to be talking about virtual AGMs today, but just so we're aware. So a virtual meeting, and this is based on definitions from the Institute of Governance, ICSA. A virtual meeting is a meeting where none of the participants are physically in the same place for the meeting, but are in communication with each other via video conferencing of some kind of online platform. A hybrid meeting is a meeting where some but not all of the participants are physically present in the same place, but all are in communication by video conferencing. Okay, so that's basically what we mean when we talk about virtual and hybrid meetings. Today, we are, as I said, mainly going to be talking about virtual meetings. So the impact of moving mainly online. Interestingly, the overall feedback from boards is that it has had quite a positive impact, that people are seeing much better engagement, certainly better attendance at board meetings and better attendance and engagement at AGMs. We held our WCVA AGM in November, I think it was, and we had a much higher attendance than we usually get at an AGM. So that is potentially good news for governance. And there are some other benefits. It can save time, it can reduce costs, it certainly can reduce our carbon footprint in terms of travel and those kinds of things. And it can also provide a formal record of the meeting, which may be useful too if you want to record the meeting. So there's definitely some benefits to moving things online. But there can be drawbacks. Obviously, accessibility. In some ways, going into the virtual space can make things more accessible, but not for everyone. Not everyone is online to the same degree. Not everyone has the digital skills. There may be barriers for people with certain impairments, and something that I haven't mentioned on there, but I'm sure might be quite pertinent to yourselves, is that broadband coverage can be quite variable in different parts of Wales. So there are certainly some barriers there. How to choose the right tool. There are a lot of tools out there that you can use to hold virtual meetings and AGMs, but not all are free, or they will have a certain amount of time may be free, but it may not be enough for what you want to do. So it can come with costs. How do you manage voting at AGMs? That's something we get a lot of questions about. Your members have a right to vote, so you need to make sure that can happen. But how do you make sure that it's secure, that it's robust, that only the people who have the right to, who are eligible to vote, are able to do so? It can be quite burdensome on the chair. I think running meetings online or by phone is stressful in a different way to meeting in person. So those are things that you do need to think about in terms of the drawbacks. So as I've said there, online AGMs do come with challenges. It's not necessarily an easy fix, and there's certainly no one size fits all approach. It's something that needs to be designed. Your AGM will need to be designed specifically for your organisation. And that's something that it might be really good for you to talk to your CVC about in terms of what will work for you. Right, so how do you start making decisions about your AGM? That's what I want to talk about next. First, this is just a little update for charitable companies and charitable incorporated organisations. So over the last year, we had some amendments to the Corporate Insolvency and Governance Act, which basically relaxed the rules around AGMs for these kinds of organisations. These are membership organisations which basically have a company structure. That has now ended. So that ended on the 30th of March 2021. So we can't use that anymore to rely upon for our AGMs. Okay. So if any of you have used that legislation, just to be aware that is no longer the case. Basically, it relaxed the rules and enabled companies and CIOs to hold their meetings online or by telephone and more flexibly. So just that makes, so you might need to have a look at your governing documents, but we'll come on to that in a moment. Do we have to hold an AGM? That's your first question. Not all organisations do. The point is, yes, if your governing document says you must hold an AGM, then you must. So do check your governing documents. It isn't always a requirement, although it is certainly in the voluntary sector, the majority of membership organisations will have a requirement for an AGM in their governing documents. So just briefly, what is it? It's a formal, usually yearly meeting of the members of an association, a company, a charity, or another kind of organisation for the purposes of holding elections and reporting on the year's events. It should be included in your governing document. It will be, as I've said, in most voluntary organisations, and it is a legal requirement for the majority of charities and companies. But you should go and have a look and see what it says, because it does vary a lot in relation to what the requirements about the AGM will be for your organisation specifically. And the business of an AGM, it includes presenting the annual report and accounts to members for them to receive, approving the appointment or reappointment of any auditors if you have them, appointing or reappointing trustees or committee members, whatever you call those people who are in charge of running your organisation. And there may also be other business depending on what's happening with your organisation. You might be amending or replacing your governing document, for example, or something like that. So that's the usual business. So that's just a quick refresher so we know what we're talking about when we're talking about an AGM. So step one, how to make decisions about what you're going to do. As I've mentioned, the first step has to be the governing document. Does the governing document allow you to hold meetings online or by telephone? And it may be that it says you can, it may be that it doesn't say that you can't, and you can make a decision for yourselves as management committees and trustees and in terms of how you interpret that. Obviously, if it says you can't, then you've got a problem. If it says you can't, oops, sorry, then you may want to think about whether you can amend your governing document to allow you more flexibility to hold meetings in these ways. If you're unsure about this, then get some advice. I'd advise talking to your CVC development officers in the first instance if you think you need to review or change your governing document to allow you to have that more flexibility around meeting online or potentially by telephone. Okay, so let's start with the worst case scenario. I'll get this out of the way. Excuse me, I'm a little bit hay fevery. Okay, so let's say it's just not possible for some reason. You can't do it. So if you've got no choice but to cancel or postpone your AGM, based on Charity Commission guidance, follow any rules in the governing document that allow you to postpone, adjourn, or cancel your AGM. If there are no such rules, but you still think this is the best course of action for your charity, then record the reasons for this decision to demonstrate good governance. If your organisation is a registered charity, it could make it difficult for you to finalise and submit your annual report and accounts. So what the Charity Commission has said about this is do try and get your annual reports and accounts to them on time. But if this is going to impact on this and you're going to struggle, then you can get in touch with them for a filing extension. So if you're worrying, you can email them there. You can also give, if you're concerned about these things, then you can always give the Charity Commission Contact Centre a ring as well to have a discussion about this if you're a trustee, and I'm sure they will give you some guidance. They are a bit they are a bit easier to contact than they used to be. So you can do that. Okay, so that's for organisations that decide that for some reason it's just not possible, but decided to go ahead with an online AGM. So do you have something in your governing document that allows you to meet virtually or to use telephone facilities? If not, can you make amendments yourselves to make those changes, as I've mentioned? If you haven't got a clause in the document, if you're a registered charity, the Charity Commission has said that they will be understanding, but again, you need to record this decision to go ahead to demonstrate the good governance of your charity. And as they've said there, this is even more important for companies limited by guarantee and charitable incorporated organisations now that the provisions in that Corporate Insolvency Act have ended. Okay, so let's say you've decided that you are going to go ahead. You need to start planning. So what kind of meeting are you going to have? Is it going to be an entirely virtual AGM, which certainly would have had to be until recently because we've been in lockdown? If it's some time in the future, are you considering holding a hybrid AGM? Might be a bit risky because we don't know what the situation is going to be with the coronavirus. Is it something you could hold by telephone if for some reason a virtual AGM wouldn't work for you? Obviously, I think that would come with, I do think holding it by telephone is going to have some specific challenges. If you are going to hold a virtual AGM, then what platform are you going to use? We'll go through the platforms in a bit more detail in a little while. Are you going to use a mainstream platform, something like Zoom or Teams, or are you going to go for a bespoke platform? Now, I don't think that's really going to be an option for many of us because using some kind of bespoke software is obviously going to be quite expensive. So it's probably not an option, but it is there. So what do you need to think about? You still need to comply with your notice periods for the AGM in your governing document. So you need to send out your notice as usual, including the details of the meeting, any resolutions, and the right to your members to appoint proxies. And proxies, it can be really useful to use the proxy voting option in the virtual space. You still have a requirement for a quorum at your virtual AGMs, just the same as at a physical one. So proxy, so this is basically when you have members who for whatever reason can't attend the meeting, they can nominate someone who will be there to act as a proxy and vote on their behalf. So this is a really good way to help some people engage who maybe for whatever reason can't get there. So do try and use that facility. Again, there's advice if you're not sure about doing that. Again, talk to CVC, but there's plenty of information about that online as well. And you can just do some Googling and you'll find guidance on that. So encourage your members to appoint the chair as a proxy so that the chair then is able to cast those votes on behalf of your members. Allow the returns right up to the meeting time, but also remember it doesn't prevent them from attending. So somebody can submit a proxy if they want to, but that doesn't stop them coming to the meeting as well if they want to. So what to send out? Send joining instructions. You might also want to send a bit of an FAQ or question and answers with the notice. Because obviously it's going to be different in the virtual space and people need to know how to use the technology and what's going to happen. And include some contact details for someone they can talk to if they have questions. Do think about security. I know obviously with AGMs you might think, well, we want to invite the local community to come along to our AGM, but you do really need to be careful. And I would strongly not advise making links public because you can get people basically gate crash your AGM and cause trouble. So I would strongly recommend that you do have a pre-registration process so that people have to register in advance and only they receive the link to join the meeting. And so make sure it isn't being shared publicly. If you want to record it, it's probably best practice to let people know in advance that it will be recorded so they're aware of that. You can ask members to submit questions in advance, which can help you with managing the question and answer sessions. Make sure you have a good kind of agenda and script to keep the meeting focused, and do make sure you have some people on the tech support side of things. So for example, someone to make sure people are muted, or as we have today, perhaps you may have a situation where you want only a panel to be visible, because for example, if you have quite a lot of members and quite a lot of attendees coming, so you need to think about that. Strongly recommend doing a trial run, a rehearsal, to make sure that everything is working and that it all is going to go smoothly. So running the actual AGM, obviously keep a record of registration, who's registered, so you know who's coming. Make sure you do have clear housekeeping at the beginning, whatever that might be. If you do want to record the meeting, check that there are no objections and do declare the proxy votes for transparency. So how many proxy votes have come in and what those are and you know how they can contribute to the overall voting. Now we're coming on to voting. Okay, so we get quite a lot of questions about this, but it really, there isn't really a one size fits all answer because it does depend on your organization. So there are a number of ways that you can manage voting at an online virtual AGM. Oh, sorry. There we go. Zoom keeps putting the gallery in front of me, in the way of my slides. So obviously I've mentioned proxy votes. So these will be received in advance. You can do a show of hands in a virtual space, but obviously you need to make sure you can see everybody and that they are all able to do that. You could use the, sorry, what you call them, the little hand raising facilities on Zoom and Teams. You will need to appoint somebody though to count them, to scrutinize and make sure that only eligible members are voting. You can use some kind of online facility or software. However, many of these do come with a cost. Obviously, you can use some kind of poll ballot software, which may be free. Most platforms have some kind of function like this. But again, you just need to think about how you're going to make sure only eligible people are voting and who is going to manage the polling. So those are just some things to think about. I think that the most important thing, though, is whatever you decide, do make sure that it's clear, that it's consistent, that everyone who's coming to the AGM understands it, and that you have people in place to manage and scrutinize it. Don't leave it to the chair to manage on their own. It's just too much on top of everything else. So it is something that you do need to think about. And the reason for this is just to make sure you don't want to have a situation where any resolutions that you've passed, any voting that you've done gets challenged at a later date because people weren't happy with how it was run or felt it could be questioned in some way. So this is really just a summary of tips. Don't forget procedure. You still need to think about the notice, the quorum, the powers to meet remotely. Check that governing document. Choose the right tool and think about security. Help everyone to use it. So send, most platforms come with good training videos now or guidance, so you can send links to that. Do test the technology before the meeting and do a run through before the AGM. Consider recording the meeting but do make sure whether you need permission, check your own data protection and GDPR policies and those kinds of things. Create clear ground rules and etiquette. Are you going to keep people on mute? Are you going to let them show their videos? How are they going to speak and ask questions? How are they going to vote? All those kinds of things. There's some tips there from the Association of Chairs on that's specifically on board meetings, but quite a lot of the tips are quite good for other kinds of online meetings as well. So platforms, there are a range of platforms that you can use. We're here on Zoom today, which has a free option, but it only allows meetings of up to 40 minutes. And obviously you can get a paid subscription. Possibly you could, I don't know, you might have another organization that you could possibly share a Zoom account with, something like that. The Microsoft Teams is free, again, up to a point, and they do have training resources. Google Hangouts is free. There's a website there, Charity Digital, which has more advice on using different digital platforms. Here are a couple of helpful articles. So that's the tips for online meetings. And I thought this was a really interesting and helpful article from a non-profit organization that ran an online AGM. So they just put up a nice little article there about what they learned from doing it, which I thought was really useful. So, so that's worth a look if you're doing it for the first time, I think. So the future. I think it is unlikely that people will want to return to an exclusively in-person approach, as I've said, because I think expectations have changed. So with this in mind, you might want to review your governing document anyway, to update it to reflect this new reality. And you may also want to start thinking about a hybrid approach longer term, which will enable your members to join meetings remotely in the future, rather than just during this crisis that we're currently in. Okay, I think that's all my slides. How to stop sharing my screen. There we go. Okay.
Diolch, Mair. Thank you very much. We've been keeping an eye on a few of the questions coming through. So if you have any questions, please share them in the chat column. You'll see a button more or less in the middle of your screen, right at the bottom. On my setup anyway. If you press on that and type in your question, that would be fantastic. Now, a few practical questions to start with. Ychydig o gwestiynau ymarferol I ddechrau. Jessica, just checking with you and Mair, are you happy for us to share the slides? And we will also be able to share the recording. Won't we, Jessica? Just checking the practicalities of that. So, Catherine, the slides and the recording and a link to the recording will be shared with you. And Alan has just mentioned that through bitter experience, he experienced his first Zoom bombing because the session was shared, the link to the session was shared on Facebook. So that consideration of security, as you mentioned, Mair, is quite an important one.
Yeah, it's not very, it's a very unpleasant experience, Zoom bombing. Yeah.
And we've also made good use of the Facebook Live facility for various events, but know of partners who have had quite inappropriate links added to Facebook live streams. So you are constantly having to be there deleting anything that isn't relevant or appropriate. So as you say, you really do need a team around you with specific tasks to do.
Definitely. I think that's really important. And I think yeah, you probably want to make sure you've got, as Hazel said, a whole team on it, and that everybody's got a clear specific role. My sister was at an AGM recently, and her job was just keeping everybody on mute.
Yeah, that's a job in itself. But one little reminder, sometimes I have been at sessions where when you've had the translator facility, some people have gone a bit mute happy and muted the translator as well, so or the presenter, so be careful, because sometimes you do need people to speak and to contribute. Now, Alan poses quite an interesting question about a minimum or maximum time limit for an AGM, and just want to share an interesting reflection. Na i rannu pwynt pwysig ath I godi'r diwrnod o blaen. I think we do have to be very, very conscious of the fact that a great deal is now happening online, and I suppose it will be, you know, I like the idea of that hybrid meeting approach. I think we will see more of this in future, particularly for national events or national activities meetings, or, you know, we are in a very rural area, aren't we? So actually, by holding hybrid meetings or hybrid sessions, it means that more people can get involved. But we have to be very conscious that sometimes we're looking at back-to-back meetings. So people are on screen for quite a long time. And there was a meeting that I was a part of the other day, and they had factored in a comfort break. It was only a 2-hour meeting, 2.5-hour meeting, but there was a 10-minute, 15-minute comfort break during that meeting. That meant that some people who hadn't had a break for several hours were able to stretch their legs and make something to drink. So I think, you know, it is quite difficult to focus, I think, for a long time. But if you are looking for a longer session, then I suppose we just need to be very conscious of building in breaks, but making sure that we leave the exciting bits after the break so that we don't lose people, so we don't lose attendees. Any other thoughts, members of the panel, on that question about minimum or maximum time limit for an AGM? Jackie, you want to come in?
So Hazel, I've been at an AGM that was completed in 5 minutes. It was very efficient, very effective, and everybody knew that it was going to be a really short AGM. However, what they did was tagged an information session after the AGM. So if people needed to go and get back to whatever their own business, then that was available to them. But they had that addition of that information session. But I've also been at AGMs that have lasted 2.5, 3 hours, and actually that's not good use of AGM time. I don't think, because it was actually all AGM. So it was just like, that's a bit hardcore, really.
I think if you've got like an interesting speaker or something,
yeah,
you know, that might justify a longer session. But yeah, expecting people to sit through 2 hours of AGM business, it's quite challenging.
Thank you, Jackie. Thank you, Maya. Comment from Liz as well, again an interesting one, about visualising how a hybrid meeting would actually work. And I guess that will be new territory for us. I think we're gaining some new skills in facilitating online sessions. Whereas whenever you used to, I don't know whether anybody else had these experiences, whenever you used to use Teams or Zoom or Skype at the time, wasn't it, to video conference into a meeting, you were almost there as an observer. The chair or the people at the actual face-to-face meeting didn't always consider bringing you in, whether that was over the phone or through video conference. I think we've improved our facilitation skills now for online meetings. So the layout of the room or the space would need to be thought of very, very carefully, Liz, just to make sure that those who are online feel connected and feel part of that meeting. And just to remind everybody in the face-to-face space that we also have attendees online. So yeah, I think we may need to work on a few sessions, Liz, just a trial, just to test that out.
Yeah, I think with hybrid, we haven't really, I think, worked out how what that's going to look like yet. But I think it is something that we're going to have to get to grips with.
I suppose it's down to having the infrastructure and the IT kit as well, to be able to have that sort of merging of two types of meetings, you know.
And that's really important, Vanessa. Catherine makes the exactly the same point. Normally we do the same, Catherine, as CAVO. We hold our AGM in a public space, in a community space. So we would have to make sure that there was adequate connectivity before we booked that venue. We always used to double check that, but we would need to test that out, and maybe you know, a bit of sharing of information in terms of which venues, which community venues, which village halls, which conference spaces are really good with their internet connection, and which are sometimes more difficult. Maybe we need to start gathering and sharing some of that information. But that's good, very good point, Catherine.
Yeah, I do think following this last year, when in future we are going to get questions from our members saying, can I join online?
Just picking up a question as well from Gail. Are there any legal requirements around advance notification, or is it down to what our separate governing documents actually state?
It's whatever's in your governing document. It does vary a bit. I think it's usually around 15 days, I think. Is that the common one? It's something like that, isn't it?
For notice, you mean?
Notice, yes.
It's either 14 or 21 days usually.
Yeah, 14 or 21 days is the commonest, but it does vary. So so whatever's in your governing document is what you should follow.
Some are 28 days.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
it is about your governing document very much so, isn't it?
Has anybody else from the panel picked up on any of the questions that I've missed? Ydw wedi colli unrhyw gwestiwn?
I think Peter Loughran wants to say something, but I don't know whether we can hear him or not. So Peter, if you want to unmute yourself, maybe you can ask your question. Or even put it in the chat.
Sorry, Peter, you should be able to speak now. I've unmuted you. You can't unmute yourself.
Okay. Yeah.
Oh, wonderful.
The good news is I haven't got anything to say, but I'm sorry I arrived late.
Okay, that's fine, Peter. That's absolutely fine. If you don't
I thought
have
I was joining a very select
that's fine.
group of 7
if you
individuals.
if you haven't got a question, Peter, that's fine. We can move on to a few other questions. Diolch, Peter. Lovely to see you.
Diolch.
I had a couple of questions, Maya. I'm going to take advantage of this opportunity and share some of the thoughts that I was thinking of as you went through your presentation. You mentioned that if our governing document doesn't state specifically that we can't look at a virtual or a telephone or a hybrid approach, then we need to be recording that decision to go virtual or to look at telephone opportunities as well, people to phone in. Where would we need to record that decision? Again, our governing documents might help us with that, but would that be at a board meeting, or because I was thinking, do we arrange an AGM to make the change? But then it's pointless if we aren't encouraging people to meet again. So yeah, it's a bit of a...
I would think it would be recorded as a board meeting, in the minutes of a board meeting, that the board or the committee have made that decision. and just make sure that it is properly recorded, and how that, how that decision was made, and whether you have a voting or whatever kind of process you have at your different committee and board meetings. That would be my view on it anyway.
And the other difficulty, and I'm sure some organisations have experienced this or been part of this. If the technology doesn't hold up, you find that sometimes, luckily, less frequently now than used to happen. But if for whatever reason the technical link doesn't hold up, I'm assuming that you would have to postpone and rearrange your AGM. Even if you did have a hybrid approach, it still doesn't seem right that you would continue with those in the room if those who have committed to engage online can't be a part of the decision-making process.
Yeah, I think, yeah, I mean, it would be a call for the organisation, but I think, yeah, I mean, ethically, if the technology failed, I think it would be best to look at what the obviously you probably have that there anyway, in case something does happen, or something does go wrong and you need to postpone, whatever. Again, you need to refer to your governing document, what it says in there around postponing the AGM. I mean, you'd have the same problem if nobody turned up as well, so yeah, so just to be aware of that. If something, have that backup plan B if something goes wrong and for some reason it can't go ahead at short notice or something.
And Kerry just wants to double check if our governing documents are not specific, rather than update them, we can note that virtual and hybrid meetings are acceptable during board meetings.
I think it does. Again, I think it kind of depends. I think I would have a chat to one of your CVC development officers about that, because governing documents are all different and they all do kind of say different things. I think my concern about that approach, it might be fine as it might be okay as a temporary fix, but longer term, if it doesn't say in your governing document that you can hold these meetings online, it could potentially get challenged at a later date. So I think if it's something that you might say, right, for an emergency, we need to hold, it doesn't say in our governing document that we absolutely can't do this. And for an emergency under COVID, we'll go ahead and have a virtual AGM. We've decided to do that. But I think if you were going to be changing the practice long term, then I think it probably would be a good idea to look at updating the governing documents. I don't know if any of my CVC colleagues might think about that.
I'm just also wondering, because at the end of the day, it's about transparency and answerability to our members, isn't it, as organisations or those who are involved with our organisations, and it's about making those decisions openly and as inclusively as possible. So I'm just wondering, under the circumstances, Maya, whether maybe reaching out and asking the question to members whether they would object to that change being made, rather than waiting for the next AGM, where you might not have as many members present anyway to make that decision. So just to support that decision by your board might be an idea. It's open, it's transparent, it's a little more inclusive.
And I would say as well, Hazel and Maya, that actually your governing document would need to be changed if you're going to go down that route. Just having a note in your board papers and recording that is not going to be sufficient enough to continue holding virtual meetings in any way, shape or form. Governing documents will need to be changed. I think it's a great idea to ask your members if you're a member organisation, because actually they're the ones that we're serving, aren't they? And the people that we're there for, really.
And I think Catherine's point is really important as well, isn't it? However you make that decision, I think ratifying that at your first AGM after that decision is made is really, really important, so that the circle is then closed, isn't it? Oh, Peter, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I may have missed this, and I'm sorry if I did, because I was still getting in. We've been talking about hybrid meetings. Now, some organizations have a hybrid approach to having meetings, and perhaps sometimes having an online Zoom meeting or similar, or a face-to-face. So that's one hybrid arrangement. But we're talking here about hybrid meetings, which is maybe something different. So I've got experience, and you will have experience, of people being online, say with Zoom. But some people are phoning in. So that's part of the hybrid experience, isn't it? People who, for whatever reason, can't be there visually can phone in. And also, I've been in meetings where people haven't phoned in to Zoom as such, but they have phoned a member of the group and so on. And I've got another situation where someone has got a laptop, but the microphone isn't working. So that person is present. She can see everybody, she can hear everyone, and we can see her, but we can't hear her. So if she wants to say anything, this is the temporary solution. She can put it in the chat box. So that's a hybrid arrangement for her. And there are these permutations around the nature of hybrid meetings. But I think, Hazel, you've been talking about something else where you have, it might be you've got well, I don't know, you might have a face-to-face meeting, and then you have some people who are available via Skype, or it might be,
yes.
Well, Skype, it would need to be a single,
yes, Peter.
Technology.
I think if we're making a change to our governing documents, then we need to think longer term. And when we are in a position to come back together in person, I think rather than it being a temporary change, I think it could be useful for us all to consider making it a more permanent change. And I think yes, not only to consider the digital element, but that telephone element as well. And as you say, if somebody's sound isn't working, then chat can be used, as long as that individual, particularly if they're a board member, still feel that they're part of the decision-making process. I think in terms of board meetings over and above AGMs, I think everybody needs to feel that they are influencing and being part of decisions. So as long as they're comfortable and that the opportunity to contribute via chat is covered and everyone's happy, then that's a good approach. Have I missed any other questions or queries?
I think there's just a quick one from, I think it was Sharon, wondering about any examples of wording needed to add to add virtually to the governing document.
Yes, I have got some actually. There's some in the Institute of Governance guidance. I could that be shared afterwards? Perhaps?
Yeah, I could share that with the recording and the slides.
Yes, there is. So yes, the answer is there is some wording from the Institute of Governance who put together some guidance on this. It's a little out of date now because it refers to the Corporate Insolvency Act, which has obviously ended. But it has some. But otherwise, it has got some good. But it's got some good general guidance about holding virtual and hybrid AGMs. So it's still worth. I think it's still worth sharing.
So that's a really useful link. And as you say, if we do have some wording that we can work on, then it makes life a lot easier, doesn't it? And Maya, not to overcomplicate things, but would you suggest, if we're looking at making this change to our governing documents, then it's probably worth an overall review of our governing documents, doesn't it? Just to make sure that there isn't anything else that might be useful to change while we're at it, while we're going through the process of updating and reviewing our documents.
Yeah, that would make sense, I think. It might be a good time now with things have changed so much, haven't they, that you might want to have a look at it overall and see is this, you know, is this fit for purpose for the way we do things now? And you might want to look at updating a few aspects of it, or even having a new governing document.
Yeah, it's worth a refresh every now and again, isn't it? So now might be a very good time. Excellent.
We have got a question from Sandra, again, really about now that the things are beginning to open up, would it be appropriate to give notice about an AGM to the community because they've got very poor broadband signal in their area, and to meet in person with appropriate social distancing? Don't know what you feel about that.
Myra, do you want to respond to that one
I suppose,
first?
I think, I mean, I'm sure one of my colleagues, Emma, I'm sure is updating our guidance on the coronavirus restrictions as we speak, because I think obviously things are starting to open up. I mean, it really does depend on what's legal and what you can do and what the restrictions are. And if it's, you know, if it is allowed, then with appropriate social distancing, it's something you could look at doing, but it obviously does have to be something that is, you know, is allowed at the time. I would say the risk is that if things change, if you set a date to have, I don't know, maybe a hybrid AGM or something with some people in a space together, obviously there might be a risk that potentially that could someone says AGMs might be happening outside.
And Sandra, I suppose it depends on the timing of your AGM, because we know that from the 3rd of May, if all things remain as they are, then we will be looking at up to a maximum of 15 people can attend indoor meetings. But the 15 would be limited by space. You know, you still need to be able to make sure that everybody is socially distanced. And then if you're restricting the number of attendees to an AGM, then that seems to, again, it's not as open as it should be.
Yeah.
And then, I think, Teleri, if I remember rightly, is it from the middle of May, depending on what happens with the elections and who is returned to power, they are hoping that we'll be able to move to up to 30 people attending indoor venues. Again, if all remains the same in terms of the level of infections in our community. Again, you will be limited by space. And I'm just wondering I wonder how practical it is to hold any meeting in a large space with people distancing, 2 meters apart. How practical is it that everybody can hear you, everybody can contribute, that you can actually have a conversation? The practicalities are still a little difficult, aren't they, for indoor meetings?
2 other questions that have popped up. One is that, where are we? I think Sharon, can changes only be made in an AGM? So I'm assuming that's changes to your constitution to allow, facilitate virtual. Do they have to be made at an AGM?
Usually, again, sorry, I keep saying this, but again, it depends on the governing document. Sometimes there's some changes, in some charities, there's some changes trustees can make, and some that have to be made at either an EGM, which is an extraordinary general meeting, or an AGM, an annual general meeting. Usually, changes to the governing document are taken to an AGM.
And the next one, quite an interesting one from Mike. We have 120 members, some of whom have registered no phone or email contact details. The only way to ensure that they're all enfranchised is to hold a mixed electronic and postal vote.
Yeah.
I'm assuming that means they have totally different time frames. Any thoughts on how this could be done? Maya, have you? That was a tricky one.
Cruel.
Yeah, sorry.
No, that is a challenge. Yeah, I think I have heard of some organizations doing things like this. Yeah, I mean, I think you're gonna have to look at how they can. It's going to have to be voting in advance, isn't it? With some kind of postal vote, whether that is, again, depending on what your governing document allows, it could be via proxy votes, where they put in their vote, fill in the proxy voting form and nominate someone to vote on their behalf. That could be the chair at the actual AGM. Or if your governing document allows voting in advance, then it could be putting in your votes in advance. I mean, at WCVA, we actually have advanced voting, so we very rarely do any voting at our AGM. Because everybody does the voting beforehand. So it does kind of, again, it kind of depends. I think it's possible. It's not great from an engagement point of view, in the sense that obviously, these members who can't attend, they may be able to vote, but that's sort of, they're just restricted to voting and nothing else. So it's not brilliant. It might be, and so hopefully a temporary fix rather than a long-term arrangement.
Yeah, I like the suggestion of a proxy vote. That seems to work, and as you mentioned, Peter, if we do have a bit of space between until we have our AGM, it might be worth reviewing the contact details that we have for members that would be eligible to attend and vote at our AGM, just to make sure that we've got emails, telephone numbers and whatever else that they're willing to share with us to make any new approach work for everybody, so that people are included. Excellent. Any more questions? Unrhyw beth wedi colli?
There's no more in the chat that I can see, and no hands up.
So mae 'na ambell I beth I ni wneud wedi'r cyfarfod. We have a few things for us to do following this session. So we will share the recording and the slides with everybody, including that link to the guidance that you mentioned, Maya, the good practice guidance, and potential wording that we could use as well for any change in our governing documents. Diolch yn fawr iawn, Mair. Thank you very much, Mair. A really, really informative session. It's been a really good use of just shy of an hour, but a really good use of an hour's time. Obviously, virtual AGMs is something that we are all either done or considering, and there's some practice that would be good to accommodate in the future. Felly, diolch I bawb am ymuno â ni, a diolch am eich cwestiynau hefyd. Thank you to you all for joining us and for your questions. It's been a really, really fantastic session, and thank you for the team, Pavs and Cafo, who have helped organise today. Edrychwch mas am ein sesiynau ar gweddill yr wythnos. Please look out for our sessions for the rest of the week, and sign up if you're able to, and get in touch if you need any support. Cysylltwch os bych chi angen unrhyw cefnogaeth. Therefore, thank you very much, and we'll draw this session to an end. Diolch I chi, a wnawn ni gloi'r sesiwn. Thank you all. Diolch.
Thank you all.